My name's Bev Starr. I've lived in the area for 86 years. I live on a farm that's been in the Starr name for well over 150 years. And it's lot 17, Concession B. And I've seen an awful lot of changes around this area, especially on Washburn Island. I can remember when it was a causeway going to the island. It was a little narrow causeway where two cars could not meet. One had to back up. And now there's over 600 homes on that island, and the traffic is unreal. And I was involved with baseball and so on. I went to school at SS number 21 Mariposa. I played ball for Valentia ball team, and we won the championship for 5 consecutive years, which was quite an honor for us all. We were just a bunch of farm kids. And I farmed, and I worked for Ontario Hydro, and I worked for Lindsay Hydro. In fact, I retired from Lindsay Hydro.
My name is Swain. I was born in 1935 and was raised on this farm, part lot 19, Concession C in Mariposa. At that time, I went to school at SS number 21 Mariposa. It was about 2 miles to get to school, and we walked. We walked there summer and winter. And the school was a one-room school with a furnace in the basement and a big register in the middle of the room where the hot air rose. And when you got to school, you're really cold. You could stand around that hot air register and warm your hands and feet, and maybe even take your socks off if they got wet in the snow and put them by the register. The one-room school had all grades. I was either the only one in the grade, or I had one other person with me, a lady by the name of Carol. Carol was very good at reading and spelling, which was not my forte. I could beat her in everything else. Having only one person in the room, I always stood first. Well, before I leave the SS number 21, we had some real characters there. I remember that we used to play a game, bolly over. We throw a ball over the school roof and then catch it on the other side. You were supposed to get it over, but sometimes you didn't. And on occasion, it would end up in the eaves trough. Now, the eave was quite a height up. I'd say maybe 25, 30 feet. And on the roof of the school were lightning rods. And there was a lightning rod cable that came down, was grounded at the ground. Bruce Grills at the time was very athletic, and he could take a hold of that lightning rod cable and shinny up the side of the building, reach into the eave, catch the ball, and throw it down. And yet, you know, I remember that Bruce hated to get in an airplane to fly, and yet he would climb up that lightning rod rope, get a ball. Anyway, after elementary school, and I went on to Lindsay Collegiate. It was LCI then. It was a big change to go from me being the only one in the class to grade 9, where I think there were 4 different grade 9 classes. And it was a completely different environment, very intimidating for somebody who grew up in the farm where we were quite isolated. I managed to survive LCI. I think the last year they changed it to add the vocation to it, so it became LCVI. And at that time, that last year, they added an addition to the school. When I first went, there was a boys' entrance and a girls' entrance. And we held assemblies up on the 3rd floor. Second year, the 3rd floor was condemned and they didn't use it anymore. In any event, I didn't really excel in high school. I found that my sister Lois was teaching in a one-room school. It worked out that I could go to summer school for 6 weeks in the summer, and they would let me teach in a one-room school, and that I did. I went to Toronto and took the 6-week course, and got a school where I taught for that first year, and I had all the grades that I had experienced when I went to elementary school. And after my first year of teaching, then I went back and took another 6-week summer course, and then was able to go back and teach a second year in that same school. The school was located at the corner of Major Mackenzie and Kennedy Road. The school is, that location now is that area is now a big golf course, and I think the school has been moved as some heritage emblem. After teaching for 2 years, then I had to go to Teachers College, and I went to Teachers College on Pape Avenue in Toronto. And from there I then taught school in Toronto. I taught school in Toronto for 3 years at a little school called Kimberley School, and then for 4 years right downtown on River Street between River and Sumac, and I had the science room there for 4 years. And when I was doing that, teaching in Park Elementary School, I decided that if there was going to be any future in teaching, I needed to get my degree. So I had to improve my high school marks, so I had to go to night school. So I went to night school in Toronto for several years, got enough marks to qualify to go to university, and then I applied to go to Queen's University on an extramural basis, where I would go in the summertime for 6 weeks, take 2 courses, and then in the wintertime either by correspondence or going to U of T and taking courses. So I did that for the next 4 years, and after I got my degree at the end of the 4 years, it was either a case of continuing in education. They asked me if I would like to be inspected to be a vice principal, and I thought that I didn't particularly like the politics that there were in teaching at that time, and I decided that I would apply for law school. So I applied for law school. I decided I'd like to go to Osgoode Hall, so that's what I did. Went to Osgoode Hall Law School. Took 3 years. I articled in Toronto, and then when I was called to the bar, then I came and I worked in Lindsay, and I practiced law in Lindsay till I was 79 years old. Now I'm retired and enjoying the farm life again. My father wanted to retire. In farming at the time we were farming anyway, you didn't have a lot of extra money. And so when my dad wanted to retire, his money was all tied up in the farm. And he was going to sell the farm, and I asked him if he would sell it to me, but I didn't have any money to pay him. I said that I would like to buy it. I would pay him if he would hold the mortgage. So he held the mortgage with nothing down, reserved the right to live in the house as long as he wanted to, and I paid him on a weekly basis, so that now he had an income and he could do the kinds of things he wanted to do. And from that time on, we're living on that farm now and enjoying it very much.
I also knew Maud and Stanley Dayton. They lived north of Little Britain at Gabtown, they called it. And Stanley was quite a interesting person to talk to, and the way he operated. Maud was in the Army, and there was a lot of little things. I remember one time I was grading the road on the 3rd concession in Mariposa, and it was a lovely day in the summertime, in the spring. And I happened to look out of the corner of my eye, and I seen Stanley Dayton going up the ditch with his old Model T Ford car, over the stumps and everything else. He'd pulled out to pass me all right. I never knew Maud that well. I knew her, but I didn't know her that well. So
when I was going to the elementary school at SS number 21, there was another school just north of Valentia, SS 14, I believe. And so we called them the South Valentia School and the North Valentia School. At Christmas time, the North Valentia School and the South Valentia School got together at the church in Valentia and put on a Christmas concert. And we'd have play, recitations, singing, and so on. And that concert was a big event for the little hamlet of Valentia. The ladies in Valentia made little bags of goodies for each of the kids. And growing up on the farm, we seldom had oranges, but in that paper bag we got at Christmas time was always an orange with hard candies and homemade candies and that type of thing. And we all look forward to getting that from the ladies in the community. The little store in Valentia, as I first remember it, they sold just about everything. It was a general store. And so they had, as you walked in, there was a long counter, and behind the counter was a wall loaded with all the produce, the goods that they were going to sell. And it was a wall that stretched from floor to ceiling, so that there were items up near the ceiling. And I can remember that the proprietor of that store sometimes had a little gizmo that they could squeeze and it would open, and they could, it had a long arm on it, they could reach up and get items off the top shelf without having to climb a ladder. I found that really interesting. They also had a pop machine, and for 10 cents you could get a real nice bottle of Orange Crush pop. And we used to stop in there and get that. It was a long journey to get to Lindsay from Valentia. That bus went up and across the second concession of Mariposa over to the boundary, up through Saunier, back across the Little Britain Road, and make its way finally to Lindsay. The roads weren't paved necessarily. Certainly the second concession of Mariposa wasn't paved, and it was washboardy. That is, it was extremely rough and dusty in the fall and in the spring. And it was a challenge to ride that bus in that dusty, as the dust came up through the floorboards. When we back to the concerts that were put on at Christmas time at Valentia, we all walked. We walked that distance. It was 2 miles more or less to go to the elementary school, and then another 2 miles to go from there and up to Valentia. And we kids all walked that distance. Very seldom did we get a ride. I think that was something that was beneficial, I think, for us as growing up in the country, was we walked and walked and walked, which made it, I think that we were healthy for having done that. Anyway, Valentia, the storekeeper there was a lady. Her husband was in the war, and she got a job as a clerk in that Valentia store where I told you that they had the long counter. It was interesting too, in that store at the very back there were nail kegs that they inverted. And so in the evening, quite often, the older people, as I was a younger person at that time, the older people would go in there and they would smoke. They would sit on those kegs and smoke and tell yarns. And I can remember how every Saturday night or Friday night or whatever, whenever we went there in the evening, there would be a group of the older folk in the area sitting around on the kegs, telling stories, smoking pipes or cigars.
Yeah, and I went to school at SS number 21 Mariposa. It was a all-grade school. I started school when I was 5 years old, along with Ron Swain's sister Lois, because we had to start school because the attendance was so low that they were going to close the school if we didn't start. There was 3 or 4 of us that started early. And I had several teachers, and I can remember when Ron started school there. That's where I got my education, and I carried on from that. I worked for the township of Mariposa in plowing snow in the wintertime for a number of years. And that was rather interesting. That's when we used to have a lot of snow.
When we were kids, we used to catch mudcats in Lake Scugog, and we didn't use hooks because the mudcat was a bottom feeder, and it would just swallow your hook, and you would spend the next 15 minutes trying to dislodge that hook from the lower bowels of the catfish. So what we did in the spring, when the ice got out of the lake and we saw the first dewworms up, then we would gather dewworms, and we would thread them on a thread and make a necklace and tie it into what we called a bob. And we'd tie that necklace of dewworms onto a line, fishing line, and then we'd shove out with our leaky boat, and we'd only have to go out maybe 20 feet, 30 feet maybe, and you could drop that line with the bob over the side, and the catfish would latch onto that bob someplace on that necklace of worms and pull on it, and you could you'd pull your line out of the water, and out would come the line, the bob, and the fish. And it would hang right on until you got it over into the boat, and its tail touched the bottom of the boat, and then it would just let go and flop around on the bottom of the boat. We were able to catch catfish after school in the spring. I remember my brother and I went out right after school, and we got a 2.5 gallon pail full of catfish in very short order. I'd say half an hour. There were just so many of them there. That is not the situation now. There seems to not be that many catfish.
And my wife came from Lakefield. Her father was a blacksmith. He used to run the general store in Little Britain. And after he sold the general store in Little Britain, he had the post office for a number of years. And then they moved to Lindsay, and yes, I worked for Ontario Hydro. I started there in 1957. I went in Cannington, Ontario, and I worked there for a number of years, and then I was transferred to Uxbridge Hydro, and I worked there from till 1969, and then I farmed for 19 years, and then I went with Lindsay Hydro for 12 years. And I met a lot of people in Lindsay. I got to know the town very well. It's been, it was a challenge. I spent a lot of long hours because I was farming and working out at the same time. It's been a good life, and we've raised 4 children. They've all done very well. And now my wife and I we're both retired, of course, and living on the old home farm. We've been there all our life, or I have been.